to Verified RX, your prescription for success. Brought to you by the Vizient Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence.
If you're wondering which therapies may influence care delivery, budgets, and decision-making in 2026, the pipeline offers an early preview, and it points to a year defined by innovation. We're seeing new first-in-class treatments, thoughtful next-generation agents, and a biosimilar market where fewer launches are offset by important competitive shifts driven by recent approvals. My colleagues Schoen and Heather Pace from the Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence join me today to highlight pipeline agents worth watching and discuss what they may mean for care delivery and spend management in the year ahead. I'm Stacy Lauderdale, Associate Vice President of Evidence-Based Medicine and Drug Information and your Verified RX program host. Schoen and Heather, welcome back to Verified RX.
Nice to be here.
Oh, thanks, Stacy.
On today's podcast, we are going to be looking at the 2026 pipeline for non-CGT therapies. We're going to have a part 2 to this podcast where we will be discussing the CGT pipeline for 2026. But we're going to talk to Schoen and Heather today. Schoen monitors the non-biosimilar, non-CGT pipeline, and Heather monitors the biosimilar pipeline. Heather and Schoen, let's start with the big picture. Now, we know a pipeline tells a story about science, about spending, about patient care. What is the story, Schoen and Heather, that you are seeing in your respective areas as we look ahead to 2026? I'm going to start with you, Schoen. Which therapeutic areas have the most robust pipeline in 2026?
When we look at the agents that are coming in 2026, there's a few therapeutic categories that stand out. As is probably to be expected, oncology is one of the categories with some of the most approvals. Outside of oncology, we also have a number of approvals coming in infectious disease, neurology, rare diseases, endocrine, hepatology, each with an approval, diagnostic, and dermatology and rheumatology also have pipeline agents.
I don't think I'm completely surprised by any of that based on looking at our spend data in the SMO. But before we learn more about that, I want to ask Heather a couple of potential questions about the biosimilar pipeline. Heather, how is the biosimilar landscape shaping up for 2026? Are we still seeing strong momentum or are we facing headwinds?
The real story in 2026 and beyond is this potential for a biosimilar void. That is concerned that of those biologics with patents expirations coming in the next decade, there's only about 10% of the 118 biologic molecules with expiring patent that have biosimilars in development. And so that is a real concern, and we are starting to see that a little bit in the pipeline as the agents anticipated to launch in the next few years are dwindling a little bit. But there have been some regulatory actions, and we'll talk a little bit about the FDA draft guidance, but to encourage some of that development, reduce the cost of development of a biosimilar, as well as decreasing that time to bring a biosimilar to market. The other thing we may see or gain more experience in 26 is the PBM private label. We saw it first with adalimumab. We're definitely seeing it again with ustekinumab, and there is potential expansion in other areas in the molecules to come. It does have some advantages in that it is bringing biosimilars. When those private labels are adopted on a formulary, it's getting those biosimilars out in practice into patients. We'll see that a little bit more in 2026 as well.
We're starting to see biosimilar development slow down a little bit. And you talked about potential regulatory actions. I may not read the story, but I always read the headline. And I saw that there was recent draft FDA guidance released around interchangeability of biosimilars. Can you provide our listeners more detail on what that draft guidance is and how you think it might impact the future pipeline?
There was an original draft guidance in June of 2024 from the FDA that really focused more on biosimilar interchangeability and the suggestion that it wouldn't require switching studies. In the last couple of weeks, towards the end of October, there's been another draft guidance released by the FDA. Not only is it suggesting that all biosimilars should be considered interchangeable, but it's also talking about the requirement of comparative efficacy studies and switching more to an analytical analysis for the approval of biosimilars, which would hopefully decrease the resources, not only the cost, but the time to market. The thought is that the more advanced analytical technologies can detect minor differences more precisely than what those clinical trials and the comparative analytical assessments are more sensitive. They would be less likely to be impacted by factors such as dose selection, patient population variability, and trial design. That is still in its draft phase, so it's currently open to public comment. We'll see how that progresses in the coming year.
That will be interesting to watch to see, because I think it will be much welcomed if all biosimilars are considered interchangeable in the future. John, if you had to pick the pipeline's biggest firsts, therapies tackling high unmet needs in new ways, which drugs would make your shortlist?
So far, there's a couple drugs that stand out to me in 2026, and the pipeline is something that's always evolving. As of now, these are the couple agents that I would pick. First one is Orviglance. This is a new imaging agent for MRI. It would be a first-in-class manganese-based oral contrast agent, so it would be the first non-gadolinium contrast agent, as well as the first oral MRI contrast agent. It's specifically being evaluated for use in liver imaging and would be useful for patients that have liver lesions who have impaired kidney function. This is going to see use in both the inpatient and outpatient setting.
Real quick before we move on to your second one, just curious, why is it such a big deal that it's not a gadolinium-based imaging agent?
One of the concerns with the gadolinium contrast agents in patients with impaired kidney function is that it increases the risk of a rare but serious debilitating disorder called nephrogenic systemic fibrosis. This would allow an option to presumably use this agent safely in these patients without that risk, as it does not contain gadolinium.
Very, very interesting. All right. What other first-in-classes do you have for me?
The next one I would highlight would be Tabelecleucel. This is a first-in-class, off-the-shelf, allogeneic, EBV-specific T-cell therapy. It's being evaluated for use in relapsed refractive post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder. It's been studied in both the solid organ transplant and hematopoietic stem cell transplant settings. There are currently no EBV PTLD therapies approved in the US, so this would be the first agent specifically approved for that indication. Current standard of care in this setting generally involves reducing immunosuppression and using rituximab with or without chemotherapy, with variable outcomes with those treatment interventions. So this does have the potential to establish a new standard of care in that setting and would likely see both inpatient, outpatient use of this one.
We will have the names of these pipeline drugs in the show notes if you want to go back and look at more information for yourselves. What is your third one?
The last one that I think I would highlight as a top pick in this setting is a new drug called Tanruprubart. It's a novel humanized immunoglobulin recombinant antibody, and it's going to be used for severe Guillain-Barré syndrome. This would be the first drug specifically approved for this indication. We don't have any current medications that have that indication, and it's demonstrated some good outcomes in phase 3 studies and real-world data, and would likely see this on the inpatient side, given that it's primarily been studied upfront in the initial presentation of that severe GBS.
What is the standard of care right now for GBS, and has this shown any improvement over standard of care?
Generally, treatment involves the use of IVIG and plasma exchange, and there has been some real-world data studies where they compared Tanruprubart versus that standard of care and showed benefits in a variety of different outcomes, including muscle strength, mechanical ventilation, and ICU length of stay. So I definitely think this one is an agent to keep an eye on, particularly given its potential for inpatient use and improved outcomes over current standard of care.
Very, very interesting. All right. So those were your 3 first-in-class agents to watch. Are there any drugs in the 2026 pipeline that may not be completely new, but could be therapeutically disruptive? Maybe they change how or where care is delivered.
There's definitely a number of drugs that have the potential to disrupt or have potential quality of life advantages or convenience factors that are coming. And a couple of those that stand out to me include Icotrokinra. This is a new drug for plaque psoriasis. It's an IL-23 antagonist. There's a variety of injectable IL-23 antagonists, IL-17 antagonists for this indication, but this one is unique because it's the first oral IL-23 antagonist, a convenience factor over that injectable.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing more of these immunomodulating drugs become oral. So this is a very interesting time. Any other drugs?
The next one that I would highlight is a new insulin. It's Insulin Icodec. It's a new sub-Q insulin for type 2 diabetes. This would be the first once weekly basal insulin as opposed to the once daily insulins that we currently have. It was originally submitted for type 1 diabetes, but now has been resubmitted for type 2 diabetes.
I absolutely remember when this was submitted. Was there any safety and efficacy concerns, or why did it have to be resubmitted?
When it was submitted for type 1 diabetes, FDA did express some concerns around the data and concluded that it was insufficient to clearly demonstrate a favorable benefit risk profile just due to increased incidence of severe hypoglycemia in the weekly insulin icodec group compared to the daily control group. But ultimately, it did not move forward when it received a CRL due to manufacturing process concerns in July last year. But since that time, been resubmitted, and now the focus is on trying to get this approved for type 2 diabetes. So we'll see what the path forward looks like with that.
All right. Before we move back over to Heather, any honorable mentions? Maybe agents that aren't grabbing the headlines, but are still going to be meaningfully impactful to our patients?
There's a handful of drugs I just want to briefly touch on. One is an oncology agent called camizestrant. It's a new selective estrogen receptor degrader, or SERD, that will be used for ER-positive, HER2-negative breast cancer. It's been studied in a variety of settings, including the second-line and first-line settings, both in the advanced and metastatic breast cancer treatment setting. Particularly within the first-line setting, it demonstrated improvement in progression-free survival. So I think this one has the potential to replace aromatase inhibitors in that first-line setting. So potentially a shift in practice there. The other agents that I would highlight are all infectious disease-related approvals. First one is called Encitrovir, and this is a new oral drug for COVID-19. Initial approval for this one is projected to be for the use in pre-exposure prophylaxis. And if approved, this would be notable because the monoclonal antibodies that we were currently using under EUA are no longer available for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So this would now be the only pre-exposure prophylaxis option for COVID-19 if that one did get approved.
Is it being evaluated at all for treatment?
That's another study that's ongoing. It's being looked at in non-hospitalized patients for treatment that have mild to moderate COVID-19. So potentially be competing with nirmatrelvir, ritonavir combination, or Paxlovid in that setting. The next one that I highlight is doravirine and islatravir. This is a new HIV medication. What's notable about this one is it represents a new first-in-class mechanism of action in islatravir. Doravirine is already an approved product as an NNRTI, but islatravir is a new class of medications called a nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor, or NRTTI, which is similar to NRTIs with that additional translocation component in that mechanism of action. So likely would see this in treatment experienced individuals first, but is also being evaluated in treatment naive patients. Notable approval given a potential first-in-class new treatment modality for HIV that could be beneficial in resistance scenarios. And then the last one that I just want to touch on is a new broad-spectrum antimicrobial, cefepime in combination with zidibactam, which is a fourth-generation cephalosporin beta-lactamase inhibitor combination being evaluated for complicated urinary tract infections and pyelonephritis caused by gram-negative organisms. The niche for this one is its activity against metallo-beta-lactamase producing organisms, which beta-lactam, beta-lactamase inhibitor combinations generally do not have activity against. That might be a potential unique carve-out for this one. Likely see that in the inpatient setting.
Thanks, John. You gave us a lot to think about. It's a great list, and it certainly tells me that innovation is alive and well. But we also want to see competition in the pipeline as well. Heather, what biosimilar launches in 2026 stand out to you as impactful, either because of the therapeutic area they're entering or the level of competition they'll create? And I know you told us there's not a lot, but are there any that you would highlight for our listeners?
There is. I'll start with the omalizumab or the Xolair biosimilars because this will be the first available biosimilar in the asthma allergy space. There is one currently approved. It is interchangeable. However, it's not anticipated to launch until late 26, as well as two others in development to follow in 27 and 28. And this is highly anticipated for asthma and allergy and will offer some competition in that space. While we're speaking about competition, aflibercept or Eylea biosimilars, there is one currently on market at risk. These are definitely approved, but they are pending litigation with anticipated launch in 2026. But there are multiple, so there should be a lot of competition in that space as well. And the last one to mention is the first biosimilar for pertuzumab or Perjeta, expected to launch in 2026, and also has others in development that will follow that will also create some competition in that oncology space.
It sounds like a lot of these may just have one launch in 2026. And we know oftentimes it takes more than just one to create that competition in the space. I know in 2025 that there were several biosimilars that were approved but not launched. Could you give our listeners an idea of the biosimilars approved in 2025 that are expected to make their impact in 2026?
So when I think about biosimilars in 2025, it's really looking into 2026 of the competition essentially heating up, whereas we will see the numbers that are on market start to be moving on formularies. I'll start with ustekinumab or Stelara biosimilars. They've obviously all launched. There are a few more launched in 2026. Generally, we start to see a little bit more movement as formularies are uptaking and seeing that market impact. This will be our first full year of competition in the ustekinumab space. We'll also see some of that private label impacts because we are seeing similar strategies as we saw with Humira. The other one that has a lot of competition that I think we'll see the first full year of impact is denosumab or Prolia Xgea biosimilars. We have approximately 10 to 15 coming to market. 2026 will definitely be the first full year of competition for that. And the last one I think I'd like to highlight, at least that was approved in 2025, would be eculizumab or Soliris. And not because this is going to have a large impact on market, but the reason why this one is promising is because it is niche. We do see a little bit of a deficit in the rare disease biologic space. And so this will be the first one or one of the first to enter that. It is hopeful that it may encourage more biosimilar development in the rare disease space.
Thanks, Heather. I am super excited to see what happens in the denosumab space in 2026. John and Heather, this has been a really great discussion. We've covered a lot of ground today, from first-in-class innovations to biosimilars that will hopefully reshape competition to access. But I'd love to get a quick insight from each of you to leave our listeners with. So let's start with you, John.
Overall, the 2026 new drug pipeline is looking to have a mix of both innovative first-in-class drugs with the potential to shift standards of care, as well as next-generation agents such as those that offer convenience factors. So definitely a good pipeline to look forward to in the coming year.
Great, John. What about you, Heather?
The story heading into 2026 is really about speed and scale after the 2025 wave, not only with Stelara and Prolia, but Xolair coverage is widening. Hopefully we'll see interchangeability become easier and payers will be steering usage. So it's really up to the pharmacist to be tasked with making switches seamless and safe for the patients.
Well, thank you so much, Heather and John, for joining us today. This has been a very insightful conversation on what to watch for in the 2026 pipeline.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy.
Join us for more Verified RX podcasts. Subscribe today. Like us. Send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. Verified RX is a prescription for success and is brought to you by the Vizient Center for Pharmacy Practice Excellence. Thanks for listening.